if you're just going to take away some best practices, we're going to do like 3 or 4 just general best practices to think about. So the first one is pretty simple, right? So it's just saying document your current data request process, even if it's kind of totally informal, right? So what is, like, how are people requesting data? Who is requesting data? Where is it coming from? What happens? What types of requests are they coming in? Where are they going? Like, document. Take the time to write it down right now, and then that you can think about where you're going to go with it after that, understanding that current point. You don't have to get it all, like, don't get perfectionist about it, but document your current process. The next thing is, if none really exists, if you're finding that there really isn't a formal process, I would recommend creating what I call a first step process. All right, so it seems like a vast majority of you have it. I think over 75%, if I remember, people have some sort of central intake either through their ticketing system or through a web form, right? So that's a first step process. Even if nothing happens after that, except an email gets sent to a bunch of people that's saying there's a request that came in or something, like it's better than that distributed person to person. Well, it's better if actually something happens after that, but if you know that that exists, because you can start building the process, and that creates big satisfaction for those folks who think, you know, they need data and they want to use data and have a data-driven culture. But if they don't have a way to start, if they just sort of are sitting there saying, well, what, like, how do I find this out? Give them that first step process and then build it from there. All right. Next best practice is to do the central intake. As we saw, with many of you have already done that. So we want to create a front door, not a barrier, but a door, right? So it has to be something that actually, you know, generates results, but create a front door that people can bring their requests in, right? And then we want to basically monitor that door. So we want to have some method that we can say, well, did the request came in? How's it going? What's happening to it? Do we have a path for it? You know, we don't just want to put a thing out on the website and have it go nowhere, or that's not going to be very successful. So create that front door and then monitor it. And the next thing is, like, have some sort of, you know, gift book and welcome instructions. I mean, maybe I'm going a little too far with this, like, metaphor, but the point is, like, have some knowledge base that's updated as part of the process. So if someone's coming to this door, like, you've all been there, you've been to a hotel, and you're like, where's the ice machine, right? And so it's good to be able to look that up. And when you can't find that book, it's very frustrating, and you don't know where the ice machine is. So having a place where you can, you know, see what's documented, what's happened before, what other questions people have had in FAQ or any knowledge base, building it up. And then it gets, when I mentioned the gift book thing, it's because then people can add to it, right? They can add to it with each question. So mainly it's a central intake with a knowledge base to do it and some sort of monitoring. All right, so the other best practice is self-service. So can you avoid the request altogether, right? This is the ideal situation. Like, the best data request never happens because they get the answer on their own. So to do that, you really need that knowledge base, though. And so there's some sort of open discovery of whatever existing reports and extracts exist. We highly encourage a centralized sort of enterprise knowledge base, but that's not always possible. So if you have, you know, some sort of searchable, you know, reporting inventory on your various reporting tools or within each one of your systems, that's fine if people know where to go for that, but definitely make that as available as possible. Also have things like a data dictionary and data definition. So if you're going to allow people to do their own reporting, their own ad hoc reporting or their own discovery, they're going to need to understand what you mean by retention rate or by a physics major, and so that they can make sure they get the right results from self-service. And then lastly, have data system information available. So you know, there's a whole separate presentation that I've done too around sort of the barriers to reporting. And one of the things that people don't do that we encourage them to do more of is to train on the data more than the reporting tools. So people, when they roll out a reporting solution, they do a lot of training on the tools and not as much training on the data. So if you have good information about what the data system is, where things are, and the dictionaries associated with it, you are 9/10 of the way to self-service, right? So take that knowledge base that stores all this information and make it as available as possible to whoever you can, so they can do self-service. If they can't find what they need, give them some way to ask for help first. So this is a thing that actually came out of our data cookbook customers, that they asked for this. Like we would have as our first step process the submitting of a request I mean, well, they could search, right? They could do this sort of self-service stuff, but if they didn't find what they need, then they would submit a request, and we now had a deliverable request, right? But it is possible that there is an intermediate step there where there actually is information necessary for them to either run their own report or do their own self-service, but they couldn't find it. So having some sort of ability to ask for help or reach out for help to facilitate self-service prior to a request can be really helpful. So I encourage you to think about that step. And that can be through your support and ticketing system. It can be the same thing, but also just having sort of a review, like before you start a project, can we go back and say, oh, well, actually there is something here. And then lastly, if they can't find what they need, if they can't find that self-service, then we're definitely creating a request. And again, it might start as a request and then it officially becomes a request as opposed to being kicked back to them, but that's an important step. So think about that first step, self-service, before just straight up build something for me. All right. Now the next thing is to have templates. Now most of you said you didn't have that, so we're going to talk about that for a little bit. So it's good to think about different templates for different request types, and they should be easy to use, but thorough, right? So it's good to have like examples or style guides of things. So if I'm going to ask for a report, form, give me examples of what I'm supposed to put in purpose and what I'm supposed to put in description and what I'm supposed to put in select criteria or whatever we're going to ask people to do is really helpful. And also not trying to make everybody fit their report, their data request type into the same, 3 or 4 fields that are common to everything. As you saw up front, there's a wide variety of different types of things people request. A dashboard item built on top of a data warehouse is very different than someone asking who just wants the number 12 back to them. So also be willing to have sort of templates with increasing complexity. So we have in the templates in the data cookbook a very complicated spec, that you can use if you want to get totally in the weeds. Necessarily complex, I call it, right? That is not what you want to give your casual user who is submitting a data request, right? So we encourage, the good approach is to have some sort of simple request entry, like a form that someone can fill out. In our form, the only required field is purpose, right? So like purpose and description and when you need it, and then they can start filling in other things if they want, but they're not required. They can just leave it at that, and then the analyst picks it up or whoever's going to pick it up, and then they will interact with the users, but they don't have to start by filling in a bunch of stuff. They can just start very simple, but do focus on that why and what first, right? So then you can go more complicated specs as needed. If you do have a ticketing system, the nice thing about having a template, like maybe the template doesn't work in the ticketing system, but you could have the very simple request entry there, right? That says, what's the purpose, when do you need it, why do you need it, is there anything you can tell me about this? And then it gets assigned to an analyst. Now they have a template that becomes the sort of script for interviewing them about what they want. So you can reach back to them. All right, well, you said you want this, or do you know, is this a graph or is it a CSV? To give me more information. But if they have that template to sort of go through, then they can start filling that out, and that can inform the person for the next time they ask too around what that is. Your template, this is very particular feature here, but your template should, if possible, refer to and update your data dictionary. Okay, so if people are trying to build a report, data request with a report, and they want to know the number of active students, or by gender, by cohort or whatever, the terminology there is very important. And so people who are able to sort of have access to a data dictionary and have that inform, the template, or to be able to have references to the language in your templates to a data dictionary is super helpful. And then if there's a request and there's language in the request, specific language in the request that does not exist in your data dictionary, like if I asked for, I want anyone with an aged AR balance more than 60 days, and aged AR balance doesn't exist in my dictionary, it is safe to say that it's a very specific term, right? So I want that defined. So we want the process of filling in that template either point to data dictionary if it exists, or to encourage the updating of that data dictionary as part of the process. The next big best practice is to having some sort of data request or queue manager. Okay, not everybody needs this. It depends on the size and complexity of what you're trying to do, and the number of requests, and the number of analysts, and all of that. But there's pretty good value. So, when should you have a request manager? This is really when there is confusion or complexity around who's getting the work, or there is bottlenecks or challenges or concern around customer service. That's when you really want to have someone managing that process. It doesn't have to be a full-time job, just basically making sure that things are moving through the process. Maybe that could be done by the same person who's just doing the managing your general support queue, or maybe it's done by someone in IR or IT or BI, one of those groups. But the benefits of that is that you can monitor the status of these requests, right? You can avoid cherry picking, which I think we've all done in our life. It's like, oh, that's an easy one, I'm going to take it and do it, right? That doesn't make everyone really happy if someone's always taking all the easy reports. Help set priorities, right? There's a whole bunch of things coming in. Which one do we do first? How do we want to do this? How do we want to manage it? That can often conflict with a cherry picking impulse. And it can allow for more efficient and timely results, and then better customer service from that standpoint, as well as better sort of employee development around the people who are building the report, to have a little bit of oversight around what they're doing. I am not an advocate of unnecessary bureaucracy or complexity. So I think if you are a shop that has just one or two people, I don't think it's necessary, right? In that case, you might want to still support the sort of self-assignment. So that things come in, I'm going to go pick it off the list, right? And if you're going to cherry pick, you can cherry pick, but the self-assignment is a good way to go. But there's a point where having a request manager, it makes a lot of sense.